Right. I'm so excited to introduce our community today to Christa Biegler, award-winning dietitian, root cause nutritionist, owner of Less Stressed Life Nutrition. She helps people resolve food sensitivities, inflammation, eczema without the unnecessary restriction or endless supplementation or costly testing, which this is so interesting to me already because my family kind of lives in this area a bit with sensitivities. So selfishly, I'm so excited to have you today, Krista,
Perfect.
but I know
Even
our
better.
community, yes, community as well. So welcome. And I always love hearing, so I'm a dietitian as well, and it's always fun to
Mhm.
hear what's the path, what's the journey that took you where you are now versus where we all started.
Oh, yes, you mean where we would have taken off from school compared to somewhere else.
Yes. Yeah,
You know,
internship to integrative.
yeah, honestly, just kind of kept t tugging at me. I grew up in a kind of a little bit of a holistic household in general, and I thought I was going to learn a little bit more of that in
Mhm.
dietetic school. I was still really interested in everything I did. I think I just like love a lot of things. Um, But long story short, I moved to the middle of nowhere. And so jobs were not quite worth it. So I was doing contract work in general. So I was doing contract work in lots of different areas. I worked in dialysis, which is like super lab heavy, super, the dietitian is a big, big deal technically, but it's like a really interesting, complicated population. I did school nutrition stuff. I did diabetes education, I think for both adults and kids. I did all kinds of interesting things. And I always think that whatever you do, it prepares you for where you're going, right? And
Yeah.
then I had bought this, I bought some certification in food sensitivities and I left it on the shelf as one does for a long, long time. And then someone reached out to me and she said, "Hey, there's some people in your state looking for support. When are you going to do this certification?" And I was like, "This is like it was very oddly serendipitous, right?" And then not much longer, and I was ready for it at that point. Like I was like ready to do something different. I'm definitely programmed as an entrepreneur. And what that means is, what it can mean is that you like to solve problems. And so sometimes when you're working in other places, you cannot solve problems in the way that you would like to solve problems, right? Like in an effective way. And I like some of my personal core values are efficiency and being efficacious, right? It's like I really
Yes.
care about being results oriented, right? I mean, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are Enneagram threes or eights, and so I'm an achievement based results oriented person. So anyway, all of that to say that actually kind of was around the same time as my first health crisis. Personal one that I was like aware of. I woke up one day with like a rash covering my face and my neck. And this was, of course, like right on the heels of like so much stress. I was kind of trying to change careers, doing like double the things as one does when they're trying to figure out how to change. I had two toddlers. And then there was like the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? So I had taken my oldest to swimming. So I took all three of them to swimming lessons for a week straight and woke up like that. Now, was my body going through other things or telling me other signals before that that I did not recognize? 100%, right? I didn't even know them at that time. I didn't know what I didn't know, as we all do.
Yeah.
As we all do. And so what that sent me into was there's so many like pockets of stories there. But long story short, that was that health journey took a lot longer to resolve than I would have liked it to because like most humans, I would rather have outsourced it and found someone who could help me with it. I struggled to find that person, to be honest. So I kind of like
Mhm.
trialed and errored. Realized that no one cared as much as I did about my stuff. Like, I
Mhm.
mean, you kind of get to that point because like you run into a wall. And honestly, a lot of times people end up in like, I would say alternative. And I think integrative is like, I always think of it as a marriage between East and West. Like, I can speak to your labs and what your doctor says and all those things and bring a more of a root cause approach, right? Because ultimately what I'm looking for is resolution, right? Not like some prefabbed, whatever. Anyway,
Mhm.
and so we're integrative, right? Where we have like these other options, but then there's also alternative. But I think a lot of people end up in that space or end up seeking out support in that space just because they're running into walls where they currently are. It's like, and so
Yes.
not
Yeah.
differently, right? If I went to the doctor, I'm just going to get steroids, right? So I was looking for something better.
More. Yes. Thank you for laying out that story because that's beautiful. I'm going to tell you a little bit of why I'm so appreciative of this, and then we're going to hit go on some specific topics in this.
Sure.
But so you're talking to a community of, I'm going to say seasoned women, a lot of
Mhm.
moms and grandmas. who are wanting to love the skin that they're in, learning to do that, and also like want kind of this transformation of both mind and body in a sustainable way, like getting off the diet train, getting out of the yo-yo dieting, all of
Mhm.
that, like ready to fight for bigger things, for travel, for love of retirement, for grandkids, getting
Mhm.
on the floor playing with grandkids. Okay. So I feel like that's important to know. But there's also this piece that everybody, to some extent, wants some form of weight management happening. And that could be either gaining or losing of weight, typically, in the frustrations of the stagnation of weight
Mhm.
management and progress. And what I've recognized, especially through podcasting world and getting to meet the yous of the world, is that it's this big puzzle and there's so many moving pieces with this puzzle. Call it hormones, call it insulin resistance, call it sensitivities.
Mhm.
I just talked to a fabulous dentist the other day and how our mouth can even play a part in all of this. And so what I'm slowly realizing is it's all of it. And how do we get very savvy about reaching that next person? And that's why I'm pumped about you because I feel like you're going to like shine such a light on. So if somebody feels like they're stagnant in their progress, whatever that needs to be, that food sensitivities is a huge piece of this puzzle that we could be battling and have no idea that we're battling. So thank you for hanging in there with me for that long explanation because I feel like our listeners needed to get on board with like this could be something we could unravel or introduce you to today that you would have never thought to beat down this door. And so, with saying that, like, I do think you need to describe, you mentioned your body was maybe whispering to you prior to this skin outbreak or rash, and then it was shouting at you when the full
Mhm.
rash appeared.
Mhm.
Like, what is your story and what happened with skin that was telling you a bigger picture of your insides?
Yeah. Man, there's so many directions here in general. And where the beginning of that question where I was thinking there's so many pieces.
I
What I would say, and I it's all great. What I would say in general is the first thing about the audience and wanting to be more savvy. I think that's just like the natural progression. Like we're okay with something until we're not, and then we're okay with something until we're not. And that was kind of me and food sensitivities. Like I was okay with what I was doing with that work until I wasn't. And what I mean by that is like it's super cool when people change their diet and feel 100%, like literally 80% better in a couple of weeks. That's super fun. But the caveat, the ugly side of that is when we then become fearful that certain symptoms might pop back and then we continue to restrict for a long period of time and end up in this food fear mindset restriction piece. So I just need to caveat that coming in. But as well coming in for me other symptoms and I think you know helping people understand symptoms is valuable and one of the ways I like to do this is if you Google multiple symptom questionnaire there's long questionnaires you can find that go by essentially different areas of the body and none of these are diagnoses and so they're just giving attention or shining a light on something that you thought might have been normal that isn't normal. So, for example, kind of an older example of this that's kind of high on my mind because of the season that we're in right now was dry skin. And so I used to think, oh, I had this dry skin stuff that would happen every winter. And I always just kind of thought, and it was a little more than that. And I was like, oh, it's just genetic, was what I used to think. And it's sort of on my mind this week because my middle schooler was talking about how we were playing this game on a bus I was chaperoning recently. And she said, I gave him a question of if you were going to a deserted island, you could only bring three things. What would you bring? And she's like, what's aqua for? All these kids said aqua for. And I was like, whoa, right? So when your skin is that dry, there is something else going on. Like your cell membranes are not making beautiful cell membranes. So anyway, dryness was a thing. Throat clearing, right? So like having phlegm or like congestion after a meal to me was a really significant one. Having poop that floats, having a stool that floats is like you not really processing through fatty acids, which means you're not going to have beautiful cell membranes, by the way, if you're not like processing through fat. So those were like little clues. For me, the clues are this subtle: waking up without good energy, like waking up and not being able to like get up and like be good. So that's actually a early sign for me that like something could be supported, is like if I'm kind of a little groggy when I wake up. For other people, another very similar one to this is waking up feeling kind of stiff, like you need to sort of stretch out, and feeling like in general, like I gotta kind of like get going with my day before I like the tension or the stiffness sort of like leaves my body. That's a really nice subtle symptom that's kind of pointing to a system in your body, probably. Like there's actually, that isn't necessary usually, like that is an
Yes.
optional symptom. So those are some of those subtle symptoms that I mean, but man, there can be hundreds of them. And so some common ones with food sensitivities, like I had mentioned, was the throat clearing one. I work with a lot of skin, so like sometimes I look through those glasses of skin, but also with food sensitivities in general, a lot of digestive and bowel movement stuff, all of that's pretty like easy from our perspective. Like I love to support that stuff. But then it can be those other sneaky things, like one that might show up with both of our populations would be this inflammatory water weight. And that should not be confused with actual weight gain, right? Where that's where you're kind of like swinging more than 5 pounds in a couple of days. That one might be a real big, triggering one. And so what might that look like? It might look like having ankle, like, rings around where your socks were or something like that, or like spots where your jewelry was. That might be super subtle for inflammation. For me, it's like, what's going on with my face? I've gotten pretty aware of it, so I can kind of tell, like, if I have lymph stagnation, most of your, like a third of your lymph nodes are from your shoulders up, actually. So it can be a very easy place. So I like have hooded eyes. My daughter. So anyway, all of that can be like lymph stuff. That's a super nuanced and weird and super rabbit hole. But just in general, like gaining or fluctuating more than 5 pounds over a few days is usually inflammatory water weight. And usually, if there's a subclinical thyroid thing going on, it's going to feel like blah. I don't know how else to describe it, but people will call themselves, they'll say, like, I feel kind of fluffy, but it's like the weight, like, it's not like there's a big shift in like weight, but it just like, I feel kind of like they'll say inflamed or whatever. And I like think that that points for sure to, another system not working, but like subclinical thyroid, which I always feel like needs a lot of caveat or a lot of definition, because unfortunately, anytime you like talk about something surface level, it's like we can go lots of different ways. People can say, "Oh, I had that tested." I'm like, "All right, well, let's break that open."
But did you?
Blah blah
Yeah.
blah. Yeah, right, exactly. So
Yes.
there's a lot of symptoms. So those are some of mine. Those were kind of weird and nuanced, right? But everyone's got specific ones. And I think it's magical and it's a skill to start to learn which ones are yours after you heal initially. Or, if you're at the very beginning, to assess, like to look at one of those questionnaires and say, like, oh, I didn't even know that was a symptom. It's like all these kids that can't go to the deserted island without Aquaphor. I just like wish I could sit down with them and be like, ooh, this probably isn't how it has to
You're like,
be.
I have questions.
Yeah, I have a lot of
Yeah.
questions
Yeah,
actually.
I
Let's talk
brought up
about
a
anything
lot of
else you talk
questions.
about it. I'd love to help you not feel like you have to rely on those. But that's the kind of like dramatic thing of like how is it actually looking in your day, right? Where it's like if I think I need lotion, I'm like, oh, I better support my insides. So that doesn't look like that,
Yes.
right? It's
Yes.
crazy.
This is one of those moments of like, once you know something, you can't unknow it.
Mhm.
And then you also
Yeah.
can't help but want to try to help somebody else. And it's like,
Yeah.
sometimes
It's tricky.
I could help, but
Yeah.
um, but I do picture it even like in this menopause, perimenopause talk and back to symptoms. This might relate with some of the listeners
Mhm.
in the same way that when you hear brain fog or you hear the dry skin, because some of these
Mhm.
symptoms like overlap with things, or you hear sleepless or hot flashes, like there's
Mhm.
root causes of
Mhm.
those things versus slap a band-aid on it. And this is what
Mhm.
you're talking about too, Krista, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, that there's a reason for these things happening, and how far do we want to dig and dive to get to
Exactly.
the
Do
to
you want to
better?
just take, hormone replacement therapy, or do you want to see if there's alternatives for the hot flashes? Because I've seen it but go both ways, where it's like,
Mhm.
Sometimes supporting another system resolves that, and sometimes it doesn't. It's just sort of, it's a curiosity mindset, of course, right? Where it's like, how much, and I think it boils down to what's my capacity? What am I willing to do? And I think we're willing to do one thing, like we started with at the beginning. It's like we're willing to do, we're willing to eliminate foods until we're like, I'd actually like to enjoy Thanksgiving
Mhm.
or Christmas a little bit more normally without having reactions. And I mean, some people maybe never feel that way. Some of us do. And I've seen the whole spectrum. And, I was a person who's like, I would like to enjoy things, so therefore here we are.
Yeah. Well, and I have chills while you're talking about this example because I'm like, that just resonated with somebody. That was the like, you just opened a pathway, a door that was like, what do you mean I don't have to not like I could enjoy something. I don't have to
Mhm.
stay this restricted. And how did you put it? I don't, yeah, go into that. Like, I felt like you had a fun one-liner somewhere that I can't find right now. But just as far as like I'll give you my sister's example. I
Yeah,
feel
go for it.
like she had symptoms very similar to what you were talking about, got tested, did all the food sensitivity testings, and I want to talk to you about this too because you kind of
Yeah.
mentioned that you can do all this without the cost with it.
Hmm.
So she kind of got to a result that she wanted to get to as far as she does feel so much better and a lot of her symptoms have
Hmm.
resolved, but she's very limited. I think for
Yeah.
her to hear you go, you don't have to be would kind of be mind-blowing at the
Yeah.
moment.
How long ago do you think she did that?
Yeah, I'm gonna say 5 to 8 years at this point.
Okay, got it. I mean, yeah, there's layers of what happens here in practice because to try to like help with this story, I started in that place where I started with doing food sensitivity testing. And are there better and worse ones? 100%. So we could talk about that. But um, I started with that, and then it was wonderful until it wasn't enough, right? And then you add something different, and then that was wonderful. They kind of have this, there's this statement that people say sometimes, like, God won't give you what you can't handle, or something like that. And
Hmm.
that was kind of how I felt like my whole private practice went initially. It was like, it was great. And then it was like not enough. And then I added something new and it was great. And then it wasn't enough. And then I added something new and it was great until it wasn't enough. And 10 years later, here we are in private from a private practice standpoint. And last year, I personally think asking powerful questions is how you get the transformations you want in life. And so ultimately it boils down to like, what do you want to do? Would you love to spend a couple $1,000s in testing? No problem, right? Like we can find things on testing, but I was seeing more and more and more, especially the last 5 years. People were coming to me doing all these other tests and not really getting results. So are the tests the thing that create the results, or the humans and doing things the right way, the ones that create results? So whatever. You can go either way. You can go down either rabbit hole, but our human tendency is like testing is essential. And I think if you haven't done anything, sometimes testing is nice. But a year ago, I was like, how could we help get people get better results and even reduce the cost? And I essentially, actually, that wasn't the first question. The question was really like, how do I help people get results even faster? And I was like, well, I wouldn't wait 3 weeks for test results to come back. I just get started because it's like, to me at this point, I can see all these patterns, right? I'm like, I know where they need to start. I know where they need to start. And that just is what accidentally happens sometimes if you've been doing something for so long and you love pattern recognition. It's like, oh, well, this is what I think is happening. Why don't we just get started? And I also take an informed consent approach to testing. So it's like, come in, just get started and get some results. Or if you feel like if you feel really attached to the fact that you would like to see something on paper, you can. But also know that tests are tools. They are not, you know, um, you know, they're not complete truths 100% of the time. They have issues as well. And that was kind of my annoyance is like half the time they're super awesome. Everyone's a test is like tells them what's wrong. And then the other half the time they're like not really that exciting, to be honest. That's like literally what the breakdown is.
Okay, so and speak over me on this because I have a theory that with the test, it feels like at least it gives somebody a starting point. Like if
It's
they,
totally fine. Yeah. Go ahead.
okay, yeah, just because, there's elimination diet and you can speak on that too. But when people just start pulling things and they feel like they're throwing noodles at the wall to see what
Yeah.
sticks.
So I think there's two conversations. Well, I think we could talk about this from a perspective of do you want to test or do you just want to trial something? And is that needed in the first place? So I think this goes back to philosophy, first of all. So part of helping guide this conversation would be the philosophy I have is that we all need a healthy whole food diet, right? So we're not talking about tolerating red dye number 40. Like, I'm not really talking about that. Like, I'm not expecting you, like, whatever, do whatever you want. I'm just saying this isn't like a natural substance. I don't think necessarily everyone will tolerate that particular thing, right? So I'm just saying the philosophy is like, we all need to consume healthy whole foods in general and digest them and absorb them, etc. And so part of like there's a lot of ways we can go here, but part of the question is, do you need to do a food sensitivity test to get the results your sister did? And the reality I have found myself in after doing that types of testing for a long time and getting amazing results and whatnot is not necessarily. So part of what happens when you do a test like that, so there's multiple ways to do them properly, improperly as well. So a very, very, very common way that people go about doing those is go buy this test on the internet, and it said I was reactive to this, 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 and this. So I took those 5 things out. And sometimes it's better and sometimes it isn't. And when I was doing food sensitivity testing, and it's not that I won't use it, there are situations where it's more helpful. Autoimmunity, way more helpful. There's
Mhm.
cellular change that happens there where like food makes a big difference. And this is already a type of autoimmune, but irritable bowel disease, Crohn's or colitis can make a bigger difference. Not just IBS, like or constipation or diarrhea, but I mean like actual Crohn's or colitis, it can make a bigger difference. But when I was doing more food sensitivity testing or food sensitivity testing, you flipped it on its head, and essentially you had 170 things tested. You saw what was high, and you started with the known good stuff. So like you really only started with 20 to 40 and then broaden, 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 broaden. But if this isn't being guided properly, and you kind of needed to work closely with people, but if it's not being guided properly, it would be very easy for someone to like not broaden, right? And the other thing is there's some difference in philosophy here. Some people would say, oh, when you do the elimination diet, you heal your gut. And I question whether that's accurate. I think that's an oversimplification. There's multiple things happening. Here's what you need to understand at the surface. Food sensitivities are not particularly root cause. They're actually secondary. They're just more at the top of the surface. They're superficial. They are caused by other things happening under the hood. They are caused by immune and gut dysfunction and toxic burden overall. Those are the main things. Also, stress chemistry. So there's a few buckets. Like when everything else is out of balance, the immune system is getting stressed. And when the immune system is stressed, it's going to react to foods in an inflammatory way that's very malleable, that changes. And those are food sensitivities. So food sensitivities are top level to me. And so when I'm trying to get to like, what's the best use of my time and money? I'm not hanging out there like I used to, right? I started there. It made a lot of sense as a dietitian as well. I was like, oh, cool. Let's change diets. So should everyone experience diet change? Probably. Like, I think it's great because it's like it teaches us a lot about ourselves. Do I want to be the one who's always, I always I have another rule. I don't change people's diets when it's not their idea. That never
Yeah.
works.
Yes, that's so good. Yes.
Yeah. Like,
Or
I
else we're
don't,
back to a diet mentality, right?
right,
Like then it's like
right,
not them living their authentic choices.
right.
And so we're living in your land and your lingo, so we have to rewind a little bit.
Yeah,
When
I
you
know.
say things like, no, this is so good, but like you're like the top 20, 50, we're talking food choices that you're like, I would start with the
Oh
top.
yeah. So if I was doing food sensitivity testing, and first of all, I think let me zoom out a little bit more and describe the differences in food reactions. Thank you for letting me do that. We universally agree about allergies for the most part, right? Those are IgE reactions. That's what you think about with anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis is not always the side effect of an allergy, but whatever, right? So we think that those are going to show up on testing over and over and over. Okay. What we do not agree about is the other types of food reactions. Intolerances, yes, a little bit. It gets a little muddy actually after that, but the actual experts in this area would divide it between allergies, sensitivities, and intolerances. So intolerances we also kind of recognize, right? Lactose intolerance is usually like an enzyme deficiency for a specific thing. And then there's sensitivities. Sensitivities are kind of like the stepchild of like your doctor is maybe going to poo-poo this and say it's not real, but we actually do agree about it conventionally because in conventional medicine, we describe non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is having a sensitivity to gluten but not having celiac. And so we just defined a food sensitivity right there. It's like it's not an allergy, it's a sensitivity. It's like non-allergy food sensitivity, right? So we don't agree about it, but we clearly kind of do. And so, but then the issue is we don't have, and it makes sense when you understand the rationale behind it. It's like it all makes sense because you can't just have a black and white test around it because it changes, and that's going to be where it's like, oh, this isn't valid because it's going to change. If it stayed the same, it would be an allergy in theory, right? Like kind of. And so it's actually the type of immune reaction. So an allergy is an IgE, like elephant reaction. I think about it as like red Nerf gun bullets, and then there's a bunch of other immune reactions, and those can be like green, blue, whatever Nerf gun bullets. That's IgG, IgM, and T cells. And so most food sensitivity tests on the market are IgG, which is one more type of Nerf bullet. There are a couple that are the accumulation of all food, like the pile of Nerf bullets at the end. And so they show like the accumulation of the reactions for those sensitivities. So that's one I used to use. And so essentially what you did was you tested 170 foods. You're going to see like green is good, and then yellow is kind of inflammatory, and then red, and there was numbers assigned. And so you would start at the lowest inflammatory food. So you were getting the real lowest, like these were tested. So you knew these were the lowest inflammatory foods. So you ended up having to be a lot very creative. It was like maybe you had 3 proteins to eat. Maybe it wasn't like crazy. It just depended on the actual results. And so you had a list of maybe between 20 to 40 food and food ingredients to work with. For about 2 weeks, there's a half-life of certain immune cells that's about 10 to 14 days. So that's what you were trying to leverage. It was like lowest inflammation for 10 to 14 days. Average results were usually 50% improvement in total symptoms or more until they no longer were. And there's certain people that are going to be, like I said, better fits for that. And then from there, you added one food per day as long as there was no symptoms. So, terrible thing to do right before you go on a cruise, right before Christmas. I don't care who you are. You'd never do that stuff before holidays. It does not
Yeah,
work.
and I think that that's such a good example too. Like there almost has to be a pretty big pain point with it, or else it's
Mhm.
really easy to be like, it'd be interesting, but man, not today. I'm gonna
Well,
do.
right. And I did that work for a while. And then it was like, well, do I have to do this work to get the same results, right? If these are the symptoms you're coming in with,
Hmm.
do I need to do that? So, what could be some of the hypotheses on why this works well? Well, it could be that you're taking inflammation and turning it upside down. And so you're doing the lowest inflammatory things. And so you're allowing, I called it like, it's sort of like having a sprained ankle. And now you are allowing yourself to kind of sit on the couch. And so that ankle can kind of heal. So, sort of like that mentality of like, oh, you change your diet and you heal your gut. I just don't think that that works if you're full of dysbiosis and toxic burden that actually cause other food sensitivities. There's a lot of other root causes that can make you look really reactive to foods, dairy, grains, etc.
I was gonna say you're gonna
Lots
have to name those really fast because
Mhm.
you've said it a couple of times, and I'm like, oh, give the examples really fast. Like when you're
Of the
like these
foods.
toxins or burdens. Yeah,
Well,
that
actually, I think we should talk about them probably more completely here in a second, like
yeah,
in
okay.
general, because I think we're starting at the top and it's like, do you want to do this first layer or what if we just peel it back and move to the next thing? And so I just
Yes.
wanted to define the whole food sensitivity ball game because it's been a second,
Hmm.
just so people understood that. But what the other thing I want to say before we move on to like what you could do instead is, why is it working? Well, it's either flipping inflammation upside down or it's giving people a really intentional, because they spent money on it, and they dedicated time to it. It's giving them an intentional time to change their diet and reduce everything except whole foods. So that's another option that people could do, right? They could try to change their diet of all whole foods and just remove all of the other things, right? And how you do that easily is like you just have a list of whole foods and you just it's like instead of a stressor, it's like, oh, let me try this thing and see how it'll work. And then how long should you actually do that? Actually, about 2 weeks. The issue is people do this stuff for like months and months and months. And so I agree that this is not just common knowledge necessarily, right? I don't always spend a lot of time on this because people who come to me have usually changed their diet. They've usually seen people, they're just not getting results. And so I kind of like, they're already dealing with a healthy whole food diet. Sometimes I'm like, can I come over to your house for dinner? Because it looks more delicious than what I'm eating tonight. And that's not always the case either, right? And so what I found, and here was the real catalyst for change, Lindsey, is that sometimes these changes just induced more stress. And when you induce more stress, it's contraindicated. So what I mean
Mm.
is like when you add more stress, you lose. Like it doesn't really, because that's actually inflammatory on the base. So when the concept of this is like generally stressful, and I was seeing that more and more and more. And I was like, what if we just didn't do that anymore? And so it was like, because it was creating this whole extra month of work at the front end and has that naturally has a lot of cost, right? It has some testing cost, et cetera. And so I was like, well, what if we didn't do that and we just go to like the root cause of food sensitivities? Because what's the root cause of food sensitivities? Well, they're not being digested. Foods are not being digested properly 100%. And why are they not being digested properly? So there's going to be imbalance and stuff going on with the gut, which is talking to the immune system. Remember, the immune system is the one that's firing off the Nerf bullets. That's the one that's in charge of the food. It's because your body's always trying to protect you. So what can happen with food sensitivities also is like when you have gut permeability, which is like fishnet tights instead of nylons, you'll have these immune system soldiers. And Lindsey, you'll eat an apple and it'll break down. It should break down all these tiny micronutrients, and the body should go use those in all the factories it has in your body. But if it's not being digested very well, and then it's crossing this lining, this fishnet tights instead of nylons, now you have these big particles, and your immune system soldiers are like, have you ever seen this guy before? I've never seen him before. Let's shoot some blue bullets at him, right? And so then they fight these inflammatory signals at it. And so you get these inflammatory signals from seemingly healthy foods, right? And that
Mhm.
can shift. And the problem is with this whole conversation and why your doctor wouldn't recognize it and why we don't recognize it scientifically as a medical community is because this could shift depending on what information is coming into the body and the immune system. So if you change your diet, so if you're eating the same things over and over and over, which is the human condition that we do, sometimes we eat the same things over and over. So people, let's use a really common scenario. People change their diet and they feel way better. And then they're like, wow, I feel way better. I'm just gonna like not add back foods and just like have these foods as my new thing, right? This is my new baseline. But after a while, that stops working. I mean, this is like a rerun of a story of like, yeah, that's because you didn't actually deal with the root cause. You just dealt with like the symptoms that were coming out of the surface where like the immune system soldiers are shooting. But if you continually have this gut membrane that's like fishnet tights instead of nylons, and you're not digesting at the top of the funnel very well. Well, now you have like two things that are just creating this problem with the new foods you ate. So now all the new foods are crossing the membrane, and now the immune soldiers are like, now we're going to react to all these foods that you eat all the time. And that story is common. It's very, very common. The
Yes,
symptoms are
you're
subtle.
making sense out of the whole why when
Hmm.
people restrict, they get more restrictive versus,
Hmm.
like it
Reactive,
kind of
more
feels
reactive.
like, yeah, more
And
reactive. Yes.
yeah, and I need to share a part of my story to help land this plane on that
Yeah.
topic as well. When I woke up with a rash all over my face and my neck, I had gotten my food sensitivity results like before that. But when I got them, I went through the natural like I got them because I was curious, but I wasn't really ready to implement them, which is
Mhm.
stupid. Don't do that because they changed like literally within a few days potentially. And so I just hung them on the fridge. And why was I not interested? Because I was like, oh, I like those. I love red peppers. I love basil. They're my favorite. And so I went through the natural human response that is very normal of like, oh, I love those foods. I don't want to restrict those. So I hung them
Mhm.
on the fridge. Then I had this health experience. So bizarre, the timing of it, or not bizarre, right? And then I decided to implement this food restriction protocol. So I did not major, huge changes for me, which is interesting because I had a lot of clients that had gotten major changes from it. So not huge, crazy changes. I was like less itchy. But here's the important part when you don't make a plan around this kind of stuff. So I'm really highlighting like all the negatives on purpose because this is what you actually see when you're working with humans.
Mhm.
So, because I'm not better than people. So what happened was I didn't go into it with a very good plan. And when you don't go into uh, a special diet change with a clear plan, it's not really date anymore. Now it becomes emotional because you're hungry. And so I was like rummaging through the pantry like a raccoon one day because I was hungry. And I reached into for some pecans because those were on my safe foods list. And I ate them and my eye swelled. And that sounds just like an allergy, doesn't it? I've never had an allergy before. I've never had a diagnosed allergy before in my life. And by the way, I can eat pecans freely now without any trouble. But at that moment, it's very anchored in my head, right? I'm like, oh, so what had happened was I created more sensitivities through restriction because the real root cause of my issues were imbalance and depletion, not the fact that I needed to not eat XYZ. I wasn't like that wasn't the real problem. And that's really is a beautiful segue into like, what is the real issue, right? It's the
Yeah.
bottom line, the one sentence answer is like there's imbalance and depletions. Like something is out of balance and or you're depleted because having adequate workers, so not having adequate workers would be depleted or understaffed. Having adequate workers, adequate nutrients in the body helps all the machinery run in there, right? That's just
Okay.
like
And when
basics.
we're talking about this, like I think vitamins right away is what
Hmm.
comes to my like if we have a nutrient deficiency that
Hmm.
needs repleted. What
Hmm.
else are we talking when you're like give more examples that
Hmm.
people could go, oh, I see that. I get that of imbalance depletion.
Yeah. Well, let me know if I am not getting more clear as I go. So with imbalance and depletion, so I like to use the lawn as a good example when we're talking about root causes of food sensitivities. Like, what if you just don't have to restrict them, or if you have a whole healthy food diet? So we want to improve digestion, first of all. And what's impacting digestion is imbalances in the gut. So, because your body would normally produce enzymes to break down things, but things can, well, this is nuanced too, but we'll just start with what I got. When you've got imbalances going on, it's going to impair regular digestion. And so we've got really good examples of this. If you just look out your window, you've got a lawn, maybe, unless you're not in a place where you have a lawn, wherever. Look at some grass. And
Yeah.
so we are all familiar, like a normal ecosystem is going to have grass and weeds, right? Anything that doesn't have any weeds is like slightly unnatural. It's been manicured, right? And we are not very different than nature. It's actually a pretty cool analogy. It's actually the best analogy. So let's imagine we got some dandelions out there, right? Because the dandelions we can picture. We got that weed. We know that one. When we know this about weeds, they take the nutrients from the grass and then they give off their own stuff, right? So you see that with a dandelion, like it seeds out and then the little seeds like blow all over. Okay. So it's not very different inside your body. You've got overgrowth of weeds potentially, and there's lots of reasons this can happen. There's all kinds of them, and it's already happening at some low level now, in my opinion. Like it's always sort of there. I think like there is not perfection. I actually don't believe perfection is real. Sorry. It's just like enough to get out of balance to cause symptoms. When we try to achieve perfection, I think we just like constantly disappoint ourselves. So anyway, in our guts, we have grass and weeds, right? So we would love to have lots more grass than weeds because if we have a lot more weeds than grass, it's stealing all the nutrients and giving off all of its own toxins or waste, essentially.
Mhm.
So just like the dandelion, it's eating up the nutrients, gives off the waste, and in the microbiome, we call those endotoxins when the weeds give off their waste, and those endotoxins can cross the blood-brain barrier and make you foggy after lunch. They can show up on your skin. The toxin, like the toxic byproducts from the weeds, are showing up. They got to go somewhere. Your body's got to do something with them, and the skin's a really safe place for your body to get rid of trash. So that's now we're talking about toxic burden. And so we can kind of think about this with the lawn as well. It's like if the lawn's really overgrown and there's a bunch of weeds and you're mowing it, well, you got a lot more trash to pick up and take out, right? And so that's actually kind of the case in people's bodies. We can have a lot of trash accumulation that happens over time. We can store it in tissue in general. And so the combination of this weed imbalance, so when we have these weeds, it impairs the grass growth, right? In the body, when we have these weeds, it impairs digestive enzyme function. And then you cannot break down the food. So that's one way of how it works. And then it steals your nutrients. And the nutrients also are part of how everything happens and how enzymes are made, et cetera. So minerals, really, nutrients and minerals. So all of that, hopefully that starts to make sense where it's like, okay, so you've got this overgrowth of things, maybe low grade, maybe more significant grade. It may or may not show up on some testing. That's the other thing, right? It's like, does it show up on testing or not? But we know from basic physiology, it's like we know having that overgrowth impairs digestion. So that's going to start, you're hearing these repetitive concepts now of like, oh, well, that could start to cause some food sensitivities. It's also going to create that syndrome we talked about with that gut permeability, right? Where it's more like fishnet tights instead of nylon. So it's like that's going to be a downstream effect. So you can imagine if you're not addressing what's going on in the gut, the toxic burden, these weeds going on, then we're never really affecting whether they become fishnet tights to nylons again. Because if that's the actual root cause of that. And so as you dig into root cause medicine, you're like, oh, food sensitivities aren't actually particularly root cause, just like histamine reactions aren't particularly root cause, which is another type of a food type reaction, right? So I'll stop there and you let me know if I'm starting to make sense and we can kind of jump further from there.
Yes, no, I just can see people going, I hear you on these weeds. I just need an example of a weed. Like they're like, are you talking about stress? Is that a weed that's happening? Are you talking about a different type of food that I'm putting in my body? Like
Okay.
everything you're saying is making so much sense. I just feel like people are going to get lost in this piece of, I need an example of what's causing my
Totally.
insides to
Yeah.
not be
Totally, totally.
loving.
It's a variety of the weeds can be bacterial of earth. There's good and bad bacteria. They could be fungal. There's normal fungus, and then there's overgrowth of fungus. Overgrowth of fungus is going to look like itchy ears, maybe sinus congestion, maybe recurrent vaginal infections, especially yeast infections, maybe VV, maybe UTI. Did I say white coated tongue? That those are all like potential overgrowth of fungal stuff, which is a weed. Okay. And then there's other pathogens that some people may or may not agree about, but they're 100% there. And so single-celled protozoas, I'm talking about parasites, which makes you sound a little bit crazy until, that always sounds crazy until people do something with that and they're like, wow, that fixed my hot flashes. And it's like, cool, awesome. So that was the particular weed that was going on for you. So it's a little different for different people. I'm just saying, like, I love real stories of like, these are the things I've seen resolve people's issues. So those are all examples of weeds. And then the toxins. And so when I'm talking about weeds, I'm talking about the gut and the immune system in general as a system. Because my approach in general, Lindsay, is like, if you support systems, everything just works itself out. And we can talk about that from the perspective of the women listening. Like if I'm in a perimenopause or menopause state, here are the systems you really need to care about for the rest of your life. So anyway, but back to when I'm talking about weeds, I'm talking about gut and immune system. Those are really integrated to the GI tract in general. The immune system is mostly living there. And then when I'm talking about the toxic burden, I'm thinking about your organs of elimination. So there's several. You got your skin as an organ of elimination. Your liver is a major workhorse, a very nutrient dependent machine. Okay. It requires a ton of nutrients to function properly. Huge deal. And by the way, there's not great testing. Like you're not going to be like, wow, what she's describing. Like I wake up stiff. By the way, that's a sign of like your liver wants some love and like you need to support your elimination. It's probably lymphatic stuff. But you can't really go in and test for that. You got to sort of like tune into the symptoms if we could talk about that. But anyway, so your organs of elimination, you got your skin, you've got your lymphatic system. I just kind of brought it up because anytime you're like holding on to fluid in certain spaces, puffy pit, like there's so many things. Like lymphatics is the real deep work, I feel like. And once you start moving it, like you can start to have die-off reactions or like more toxic burden reactions. You can actually feel worse for a day or two. Not ideal, but that's like the interesting stuff. You got stuff kind of like there. We don't really talk about lymphatics, and when we're learning when we're in medical schools. What else? So we talked about liver, like the big workhorse that's very nutrient dependent, and then of course the kidneys are another organ of elimination. Your lungs make a big difference as well because you're like exchanging air, right? So there's lots of ways to talk about the skin. You're sweating, your colon, you're excreting. So anyway, when we have toxic burden buildup, usually I'm thinking about supporting a system like the liver functioning properly. It's, in general, it's like a whole topic like called drainage. So are you are you like clearing waste properly? I think that this is dramatically important because one, so just to make it really tangible, so I think hot flashes 100% could be related to this stuff too. And I would say like if you're waking up kind of stiff, that's a very good sign like you got some drainage stuff going on. But Lindsay, like our cancer rates are 1 and 2. They were 1 and 3, but I interviewed a cancer expert recently. She said we crossed over to the 1 and 2. And so to me, detoxification is really important because your body is always cleaning up overnight, every day, between meals. It's always like digesting, moving, cleaning up, like metabolizing. It's like super cool. It's like a series of machines doing things. And we know we've maybe heard this word, right? Like the listeners have maybe heard the word autophagy, right? Where it's like doing this cellular cleanup. But when that slows down for whatever reason, And there's lots of, and I'm not here to support some of the widely discussed reasons people how to increase autophagy necessarily unless you want to. But my point is autophagy is like a janitor, like to clean up the cellular debris. And so if we're not cleaning up cellular debris, we have these signs and symptoms. For me, again, it's waking up without energy. To me, that's like, I know I got to support my detoxification. My body odor stinks. Need to support my detoxification. If I'm like, there's so many of them. But this is important because if we have this cellular burden that we're not cleaning up, well, it's going to accumulate, and then you're going to have a chunk of crap. And then what happens if that becomes malignant, right? So, like to me, I think that this is. I always tell my clients there are a couple topics that we cannot that never get old, and it's supporting your stress hormones because that's going to support you through like transitioning from perimenopause to menopause, and then supporting your drainage and detoxification functions. And that the tricky part about that is I've got to educate first. I got to like give you like, why should I care, like what are some symptoms around this, because the testing for this is not great, right? The testing is not great. And to talk for a second about this adrenal function and the stress hormones, et cetera, that's a whole conversation. But on the internet recently, people talk about cortisol, blah, 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 blah. And that's fine and amazing. And cortisol is an essential hormone. Like if you don't have it, you die. But it's not as simple as just like going to get a quick one-time cortisol check. It doesn't work like that. It's like it's got a pattern through the day. So for me, I think symptoms are more powerful than tests initially. I think we can segment symptoms into categories, or if you have these symptoms, this system in the body probably needs some support. And then I take a very synergistic approach to supporting those systems. And when you do that, when you help the systems function and come back into balance, because if they're missing some nutrients to do all their processes, they're going to get out of balance. They're going to slow down function. They're going to slow down processes, and then stuff builds up, and that's symptoms. And so when you reduce, or when you reduce burden on them, right? You reduce the burden on those systems. You help bring those back into balance. You reduce all symptoms.
This is blowing my mind and so amazing. It's going to make everyone's brains hurt. I will tell you that. We're going to have to.
We barely got started.
I
Barely
know.
got started. Dang
And
it.
just to give our listeners that idea, because I will tell you, most people who have done the food sensitivity and the taking out foods, elimination, blah blah, have been given a probiotic. Like the line stops there. It's like we just need to heal the gut. We're going to work on pre-probiotics. And then the other piece of that is there's dietitian talk that at a very simple level, that was given to me. I don't know about you, but like our organs are our detoxifiers. They do an amazing job about it. We do not need any other forms of detoxes and blah blah. Like your organs
Probably
are
haven't
already
had
doing
any,
it.
they probably haven't had any I think people change like when they have these really personal experiences. You see that with medical doctors a lot. Like they
Mhm.
feel one way until they have an experience close to them. It may not be themselves, it might be someone they love, where it
Yeah.
makes them think differently. And
Yeah.
so here's the reality I have for those dietitians who think like, oh, you don't need to worry about it. Because like, thank God I have these, my body is keeping me alive every day. I
Mm.
simply am not willing to walk around with a rash all over my body because my toxic burden is overwhelmed, right? And so
Yes.
I have options that I can take that as a signal. So like if I have no symptoms, then more power to me. Thank you. Like that's amazing. But if I have symptoms and I'm not really like, picking up what you're putting down, that everything is perfect. And I live in a world that's imperfect. And I
Mhm.
don't mean it in some fear-mongering based way. I live in an imperfect world. I have an imperfect life where maybe I want to have a cocktail every once in a while, and that's fine. Like, whatever. I don't care. Like, anyway, we can all have our own personal whatevers. There's certain things I'm willing to do, certain things I'm not. Like, I don't live in a perfect world. Things are like, we do not live in a old school world where we don't have toxic burden. It just is. Like, the research is real dense around this. Like, it's not really a question mark. It's, are you even digesting, absorbing, getting those nutrients into the cell? And I mean, like the nuanced topics on this, like go deep, right? And would I
Yes.
say that people do not get that into their cell? Like, the longer someone has inflammation, the more of the stuff that that impacts how nutrients get into cell gets used up. So inflammation causes like a use up of omegas, and those make up cell membranes, and then you can't get nutrients into the cell. So it's like, I don't know. To me, I just go back to physiology. I'm like, I don't really care what these people say because like, I mean, it's just like clearly that's not the case. We have plenty of examples all the
Hmm.
time, every day. So to me, I'm like, let's look at the symptoms. They're going to be a little more accurate than the test results. So sometimes that's the disappointing thing with tests is that sometimes you get a test and it's like, well, this didn't validate what I wanted it to validate. And that's a real problem that happens. And that's okay. Like I always say, if you want to get a test, you have to answer two questions. What do you want it to tell you? What do you hope that it tells you? And can you be neutral if it tells you nothing? Because that is the reality that it may tell you nothing. And so when we can work through, if we can, have that conversation in advance, we can spend our money more wisely on tests. We can get to where we're actually supporting real root causes, which is like help your body function better. That's my bottom line. Help your body function better.
Right. And you would not be able to sit here and tell us a blank, like, this is how you can help your body function better because you're so individualized with each patient, I'm kind of hearing. Or do you have a talk that is like, everybody could benefit from this actionable step or steps? And then I would need everybody one-on-one to understand your symptoms, to understand what system needs supported.
Well, I mean, there's so many ways to do this, but like for me, I have people start to like my end goal is for them to understand how their symptoms relate to different systems. But when they
Hmm.
come in, I'm kind of like holding their hand to show them here's how you clear these symptoms that you're experiencing, these specific several symptoms that you're experiencing. This is how we're going to clear it. Because usually when you are dealing with a lot of symptoms that create action, you're kind of like, I just need someone to help me know what to do because I have no idea. And then we can start to tune into our body's intelligence after it, like you get some results, to be honest. Like I think that that is the actual trajectory of how we improve. And then the outcome is like health autonomy, where it's like, oh, I actually know how to take care of myself. I actually know how to not get sick multiple times. I actually can tell that this symptom means this. And that takes some time. Like it takes some experience. I think it's not really trial and error, it's experience. It's like, oh, I experienced results as I supported this system. Can this system get out of balance again? And you're kind of hitting on a point that's like very human. And I wanted this too. I wanted to like close the chapter on my health journey and never reopen it and be like, I'm fine now. Everything's perfect. And this like literally never gonna happen. It's
I
like
know,
what
and the
caused
faster
that?
we learn that, the less stress we're
The,
going to give ourselves.
right. I recently had like a big health hiccup and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Right. That's
Mm.
interesting, body. And I did not totally freak out. And I was so thankful for it.
Hmm.
But that was 10 years later. Right. I
Yes.
don't mean
Well,
that in a negative way. It's just like it'll take a few months to resolve a massive amount of symptoms. And then, what you use from that. I feel like it takes like people about 7 months to like really start to tune in and understand themselves.
yes, it goes back to you're curious. We have to get curious. We have to get our brain out of our way of like any barriers that are already getting put up of I don't have the time or energy or whatever to work on this. Like it can be broken down into simple form so you have time to absorb it. Doesn't have to be done. There's not a timeline that's like this has to happen now. You have to understand it now. Even just this first step of listeners being like, this is interesting. It's a little hope filled that I could get to a new point in my journey is huge. And then I wanted to ask you, for the person going, I've done a lot of my research. I've hit my walls. I'm so ready to take that next step of like, show me the way. What what are the best ways to keep listening to you, to keep like maybe it's a discovery call, like maybe work with you personally, be in one of your groups. Give all of your ways to be part of you.
Sure. Well, I have a podcast that's called The Less Stressed Life, but for kind of, and this is so good for me because I'm about to record this training where I kind of go through like each step piece by piece, where I kind of peel these pieces back and talk about symptoms really being signals. And so that's on my website at christabiegler.com. So that's the best way to find me if you want to like kind of understand this from a different perspective. I feel like that particular training goes through it and it's like, step by step by step. And here's why, because these are the issues in our industry at this point. Because, like you started off saying, we barely, scratch the surface on the topics today, but it
Mm.
is actually a little disruptive the way I'm positioning this. It's like, oh, well, you could actually resolve these things without boatloads of testing, without tons of time and a bazillion supplements, etc. And the reason for that is like these were the issues that I was seeing that I was frustrated with personally and I was looking to solve for them. And as an entrepreneur, we just like to solve problems. So,
100%. And have you had anybody walk through your doors where you're like, I can't really help you? I don't know.
actually, you know what's funny about that? Not massively. I would say there was there's like this case that sticks out in my brain where this person was like, "Nope, I only have this skin thing." And I was like, "I don't believe that." Like no one only has one symptom. That's like not I and we had really weird vibes and like ultimately we didn't work together.
Yeah.
She like started and then she's like, "Nope, I'm gonna go do something else." I'm like, "Yeah, I could just tell we were just not
Yeah.
jamming."
Which
Um,
happens. Yes.
right, but it was like I don't believe people have one thing. I just think they have maybe something that's pushing them to. And if you think you only have one thing, I say that like in my training, I was like, I was just saying, like, if you think this is your only thing, this is not true. Like
Mhm.
the first step is always assessment and awareness. It's like, oh, how much stuff do I have going on? The more the better. Because then you can like when you're doing these root cause things and supporting the systems, a lot of things disappear. And it's like you got more things to celebrate. Yay. That
Absolutely. And I think through coaching, you can just tell there are some people who are just so intuitive with their bodies, and some
Mhm.
people who, not to their own fault, they just aren't, you know, like there is just some like block up that's like they couldn't
A lot of
feel it if
nervous
they
system
tried.
stuff. Yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
I've like walked that journey too, so I totally get that. We have a lot of unconscious stress operating.
Totally. Yes. And I love this about you. And you keep mentioning the not perfection, whichever place it is. This is why you're beautiful for direction, not perfection, is because agreed, there isn't perfection. There's just working with the person and getting to, I love that you like to get to results. Me too. And I think that's the piece that's like, I will forever investigate and stay curious until I can help that next person.
Yeah.
I know we barely scratched the surface today. So you're going to need to come
Part
back
two, maybe.
on. 100% and 3 and 4 and 5. But we'll put all your info in the show notes. And I like to close out this way. And this is even more important with your topic today. If you could wrap your arms around our listeners, the one thing that you hope and pray, like if they heard nothing else out of today's episode,
Mhm.
leave them with one last nugget of just like, just hear this, then take this
Yes.
takeaway.
You always have options. And if this felt hard or complicated, it's just kind of challenging some belief systems potentially. And we can always simplify. I think Lindsay said this earlier or something. Maybe you said it. I don't remember. But, the reality of the body is like, it's a complex system and it's really cool and it's really beautiful. And we can simplify it to make it easier overall.
Mhm.
So, I mean, the main thing for me is like, you always have options. And if you don't like my options, that's cool. It's totally fine. Like go run some random test on the internet and like that's an option too. It's super cool. I don't care what you do. Like it's fine. We get to learn through our experiences and if we remember
Yeah.
that everything's a win.
Oh my goodness. So good. My brain is ready for more. Thank you, Krista. You're
Yeah,
amazing.
thank you so much, Lindsay.